Blog Talk Radio.
Well, folks, welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willies, your host. Thank you very much for giving me this 1 hour on your weekend. I know your weekend is precious, but just getting here and talking issues that will affect us maybe for the rest of the week, for the rest of our lives, whatever that may be. Thank you for giving us that time. Of course, you know this is Politics Done Right on Coffee Party Radio. Now, before I get started into the subject on Iraq, I did something interesting. Last night I was up pretty late, and I read this article that was posted actually it started out on one of my favorite websites out here, burntorangereports.com. You should check that out, burntorangereports.com. And what they did is, they had one of those what do you call those titles that make you want to click it? And the title of that title was 3/4 of whites don't have any non-white friends. And I was just about to go past it. And I said, you know what, let me just take a look at it. And I looked at it and I said, wow, that's interesting. And, then I went ahead and looked at my Facebook page and my Facebook friends and all of that and did a little bit of not any real big statistical analysis, but just sort of an empirically statistical analysis, if you will. And found out that, the news report or the little blog post was true on all sides, to tell you the truth. And then I wrote a little post on it saying, hey, guys, we should all try to make a difference in the world. And why not try to go ahead and diversify your Facebook friends? And I wrote a post on it, and I placed that post on Coffee Party, the main page, Join Coffee Party. And it actually got a whole lot of response. Actually, I didn't know what kind of response that sort of a post would have gotten, but I must say that I was quite impressed. And not only was I quite impressed, but based on what I'm getting in some direct messages and otherwise, people are making new friends on the thread and beyond the thread. And some folks have actually friended me. I just want to tell folks, for any of those who are listening, I wasn't necessarily hunting for friends. I was wanting folks within each other to friend. Of course, if you friend me, I accept your friendship if, we have common interests, which goes beyond all lines. And I've friended a few that have friended me. And I think it's a good thing for the folks within the group to friend each other and learn more about what's going on in their area. The nice thing about online networks, it doesn't matter if you're in Saudi Arabia, England, Japan, Panama, anywhere. You can learn about folks just by interacting with folks. And the idea behind social media is that. But what has happened, based on what I read in the article and actually saw empirically, is that in as much as Facebook is social media or whatever, a lot of the realities that we have in our neighborhoods, in our whatever, is actually starting to, or not starting, but is being reflected on these sites as well, which is something we don't want to do. We want to break that cycle and really have social media and socialization among not only all Americans, but all folks from all over the world, all through different living experiences, so that we can really, really see that after all, we have a whole lot of cultural differences. I mean, I love carimañola, I love patacón, and all these different Panamanian foods. think about how many Americans who came into my domain would actually add to that cuisine, add to that dance philosophy or dance motion, and feel that, wow, I've expanded my horizon. And you know what? Ultimately, folks would just start getting along a little bit better. And then we wouldn't have what the whole subject of today's discussion is going to be, ISIL, whatever the case may be. You know, what happened this week? You know, President Obama went ahead and gave a great news conference that was immediately panned because of 3 words or 4 words: not yet have a strategy. What does that really mean? And I didn't write a blog post for this yet because I started on this particular subject a bit late. So I'm hoping that you guys are going to call in and talk to me. No, you don't want to just have me here talking and running my mouth off on what I really think about Iraq, ISIL, ISIS, and all that good stuff. So, but here's the deal. The president gave a pretty good news conference, and actually it was a refreshing news conference. It wasn't a Bush-type news conference where he comes out and he says, I am going to Iraq and bomb the whole you-know-what out of those guys just because they are doing all those atrocities around the world without having a plan. And what did he say? We don't yet have a strategy. That seemed to really get the media in a tizzy. They want this guy to do something. They want to force this guy into Syria again, just like they wanted to force him into Syria back in a few months ago when he decided to call the bluff of Congress and say, okay, you want to go into Syria? Well, I guess we'll go to Congress and see if you really have the gall to say you're going to tell your American constituents that we want to yet again go into another Arab country and bomb the whole you-know-what out of these people. I mean, it's not a game. It's not a video game. I don't know if you guys remember when we had the Iraq War, how that actually looked. I remember sitting back down in 2003 watching the TV and watching those bombs falling on Baghdad. The news cameras were right there in the hotels, and they were pointed at all the places as if the news had already known where would be safe and where would not. You think there was some coordination there between news, media, government, military? Think about it, folks. They were right there to be able to give Americans that show. We had that show, people. We were able to see that wonderful show. The bombs falling, the lights glowing, and man, I thought I was watching a video game. But beyond that, Al Jazeera and all the other newscasts around the world, they were showing the results of American bombing, and that didn't do much good for us as a country. Now, like I said, folks, I didn't write a blog for this one, so I don't have that weekly blog that I give on that first 5-10 minutes of reading my weekly blog, because I thought this subject would have enough callers to call in and talk to me and tell me what you think. Was the president right? Was the president wrong? Is the president doing what's right? What does he need to do? So let's talk. I think I have a caller at 828. 828, why don't you give me your name and let's talk?
Yeah, my name is Phil Wilhite. I live in North Carolina.
What's your name, sir? Phil? How you doing, Phil?
And I'm doing great, man. And, I really admire our president. He is one of the smartest presidents that we've had. I like the way he does things very decisively. He takes his time. He doesn't rush blindly like some of the other guys into stuff. Everything he does is very thoughtful, even with the dogs barking at the back door. All of the media and the Republicans, they want everything right now. And that's not the way that you deal with problems in the world. If diplomacy is where you at, where the truth lies. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, sir. No problem at all. Clear your throat.
Okay. I've read The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and he says that fighting the battle is when you've lost at diplomacy. And that's like the last stage that you go into in warfare. I don't understand why these guys just want to rush blindly in this stuff. I kind of think that it's more they don't like the president. And
well, I think Phil, you're right that yes, we know they don't like the president, but the other thing is, we have been in a constant state of war, and it is almost like a feeding frenzy, and I did a little video that I kind of interspaced some of my narrative along with the video from the president, along with the video from the actual news with how disappointed the media was that his news conference wasn't to announce the bombing, but was to announce, come on, folks, you're going ahead of yourself. We must think about this. And I love what you said. Methodical is the word. Methodical, thought through. What's next? After you bomb or if you bomb, what's next? Something that we seem to not have done. We've actually been responsible for a lot of the ills in the Middle East right now. I mean, we have been one of the largest destabilizing forces out there, and nobody wants to accept that. Your thoughts, Phil?
I totally agree with you. When W went in and took out Saddam Hussein. Now, Saddam Hussein was a terrible guy, but at least he gave stability to that area. And I just think that for Bush to think that he could go in there, take Saddam Hussein out, and not realize that he's creating a power vacuum, that was kind of stupid.
You're absolutely right. It's interesting, right? Because everybody likes to look at Papa Bush, meaning Bush 1, I call him Bush 1 all the time, as being weak, as being all these different things. One could have walked over Baghdad so much easier than Bush 2 did in Iraq. But he, along with Powell, they simply stopped. I mean, there were some Americans that they were, what are you talking about? Saddam is a bad guy. How could you possibly stop? But he stopped because, again, it was a game of chess. Saddam invaded Kuwait. The international community said Saddam needed to leave Kuwait, which was an independent sovereign nation. President Bush, meaning Herbert Walker Bush, did his job. He got, along with the coalition, got Saddam out of Kuwait. End of story. He was, in as much as we know that's not the complete truth, of course, but for the masses to see, that was the end of the story. In other words, we did our job, we left. In other words, our job was an international, in reinstituting a country that was invaded. Now, these guys are crazy, my friend. They have destabilized the nation, and ISIS is a direct result of our invasion of Iraq. And you say, Phil?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The whole Sunni Shia thing, I mean, that wasn't taking place when Hussein was in. And no matter what side people align themselves with, stability in the area has caused, that under Saddam Hussein has caused far less deaths than our intervention and then the results of our intervention. I agree with you that President H.W., he did the right thing. He went in, very measured, kicked him out of Kuwait, and then backed out. That was great. That's what we need is forethought, not just rash, let's go to war. I think the neocons, Rumsfeld and those guys, were kind of behind all this. To be perfectly blunt, I think W was just the front guy, and Cheney was actually running that whole thing,
Sir?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, sir. I think you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But stay with me a while, Phil. I have another call I want to bring in, but I'm leaving your mic hot if you want to continue the discussion. But 210, I think this is my friend John from San Antonio. John, I missed you on Monday. How are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, I'm doing good. How you doing, Egberto? Good afternoon.
Excellent. Talk to me.
Yeah, I just want to give my take on the whole ISIL situation. I mean, what you're not really talking about is how much people within the Obama administration are talking also about the damage that ISIL poses. I got a quote from Kerry here. This is actually a tweet. It says, ISIL must be destroyed / will be crushed. This is from August 20th. Chuck Hagel on the 21st of August said, there's an imminent threat to every interest we have, whether it's in Iraq or anywhere else. They are beyond just a terrorist group. They marry ideology, a sophistication of military prowess. They are tremendously well-funded. This is beyond anything we've ever seen. Martin Dempsey, the head of the Joint Chiefs, says that it is possible to contain you. They can be contained, but not in perpetuity. This is an organization that has an apocalyptic, end-of-day strategic vision, which will eventually have to be defeated. So, you have Obama saying one thing and a lot of his underlings, expressing something that is quite different than that.
Yes, you're right, John. And let me tell you what I believe from that. And this is my personal belief based on what America has always done. There was a time that little Panama, the country that I'm originally from, was a clear and present danger. It was such a clear and present danger to get Manuel Antonio Noriega that it was invaded. 10,000 Panamanians died for one man. None of those words mean much to me for one specific reason. We are an ocean away. Yes, they're playing. If we were to invest most of our money in defending, I like how they like to use that word, homeland now, in defending the homeland, we could prevent folks from coming in. I mean, put it this way: if these guys are such a threat, the rest of the world, who are much more dependent on that which comes out of that area, should be much more involved, and we should not continuously have to spend our dollars, our resources, etc. on this issue. In my personal humble opinion. You say, John.
Well, I mean, there aren't that many forces in the history of the world who actually, invade countries as far as having either regional or world domination. Most wars are fought. They're either border disputes or they're invasions where one country invades another neighboring country. It's very rare. I mean, you look at the Nazis, you look at what Napoleon did, to where their goal, you look at Alexander, back when they called him Alexander the Great. I don't think he was so great. I think he was a warmonger. But, I mean, the point is very few people or very few organizations will say outright, we're here to, to put in, put our stamp on this particular region. This is why Obama calls them ISIL while the press calls them ISIS, because he wants to emphasize the Leviathan, which is a regional thing that
it's not just about Syria and Iraq. I understand. Right. It's not only about Syria and Iraq.
And
but
John,
I mean, yeah, go ahead, sir.
I mean, basically, I agree with what you're saying to a certain extent, but again, I do find it kind of strange that you have very selective humanitarian outrage. I mean, you had humanitarian outrage for the people in Gaza, yet I don't see here hardly any outrage at all for the people in Iraq and in Syria who have been, a lot more people, almost 190,000 people have died in Syria since the civil war started.
I understand. And you know what? You're correct, John. You're correct, and I think mostly you're correct because of a tunnel vision that I should correct, and I want to address that later on. But you're correct that I should be showing a whole lot more disgust for or passion for all those that are getting killed within the ISIS framework. But please stay with me and let's address that a little bit further because go ahead, John, real quickly.
Well, I mean that was really my main point, but I mean I do want to emphasize that I think that Obama is doing the right thing. I do think he's handling it right, and I think that when he said something, to saying we don't have a strategy, actually they do have a strategy. They're getting international people to send money and to help the Kurds and to help the Iraqis, and
right.
And so this is happening. I mean, I think that I think it was unfortunately that he said those words, but because
actually,
they've been blown out of proportion.
I found it refreshing, John. But I'm keeping you hot. But let me jump to 678, and after 678 is going to be 816. So let me. We have a whole bunch of calls. So I'm keeping you hot so you can jump in. And 678. You're on. Who do I have the honor of speaking with?
Dan Aronson. It's been a long time, my friend. How you been?
Hey, Dan. How you doing, brother?
Good. So I decided to tune in, and I listened to your first caller, and I got a little, got a little my gander up, and then I heard John actually disagreeing with you, and I was like, holy crap, I got to get on this conversation.
Talk to me.
I was like, John, bring in the truth. I love it. So let me try to take it from the first caller and forward and to make my point, and I'll do it quickly, right? So the first caller said that and you agree with them, and I totally disagree with both of you. Saddam Hussein was a horrible, horrible man, and to say that we shouldn't have punished him properly, and I'm talking about Bush 1, he needed to be removed. Just because, who was a stabilizing force in the United States? The mafia. They were very stable. Stuff ran well, blah, blah, blah. But you don't just say just because the guy's, making stability that he should be allowed to do it in a totally unlawful manner. Saddam Hussein.
Can I ask you a question, right? Dan?
Sure.
Before you finish, can I ask you a question? Let me ask you it this way. First of all, Saddam is a bad man, and I think both myself and Phil would acknowledge that. And even John, I think, acknowledges that quite well. My question to you is, if more death and all these other, if what we are replacing him with, in that situation you get more death, the destruction of a country or whatever, was that the right strategy?
Well, no, right, and that's the failed plan. So that goes to my bigger point. The bigger point here is, let's call a spade a spade. This is simply a continuation of a horrible, horrible, horrible foreign policy that this country has been prosecuting for decades, for centuries. Our foreign policy is one failure after another. I wrote a blog called, "Oh, I'm sorry, my bad," about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because we were right there next to Great Britain in putting these two people that really don't like each other into a cage, and into cages adjoining, and then saying, "Here, just do what you want. We're going to go away now."
I like the way you put that. But it's true.
We armed bin Laden because we wanted to fight against our mortal enemies, the Russians. And then what happens? That comes back and kicks us in the face. We go in, but you're absolutely right about Bush had no plan. I mean, he went in, right. If you remove a guy like that, you better have a plan for filling, as Bill said, the power vacuum. I mean, it's just, we suck at this. But here's what this is a macro problem. The macro problem is we've got to quit policing the world. Because if you're the police, then you are morally driven, and you have no choice. You have to go get the bad guy. But you throw a bad guy in jail, what happens? 20 other bad guys come up to take their place.
Dan,
may I respond here?
Yeah, go ahead. Let Phil respond to you, Dan.
Sure. I agree that Hussein was a bad man, and I still hold fast that by destabilizing the area has caused way more deaths. I find it funny that we're ready to go in and get Saddam Hussein, but we did nothing about the dictator in Myanmar. We did nothing about the genocide in Rwanda or any of the other places around the world. We seem to be the police force for our interests and not for humanitarian reasons. I think that we need to quit being the police force. We need to insist that the international community step in, and if involvement is needed, we shouldn't be the ones out front all the time. And that's all we've been. Being the police force, all it does is make us more enemies.
I have to agree with
That's
Phil
right.
on that one
That's
wholeheartedly.
And Phil, thank you for making my final point. It's all in the end driven by money. If there was oil in Rwanda, we'd be all over it. If there was a markets to be made for the corporations who have bought Washington, D.C. off lock, stock, and barrel and are running the show, we would have sent our military in there. Absolutely. And let's not forget that there's the other corporate interest, which is we need to keep war going so that we can feed the contractors, the military contractors, who are also running Washington, D.C., right? The military-industrial complex is alive and well, and we need to keep warring because, you know, I live across the river from these railroad tracks, and yesterday another one of these, what I call war trains, came by, and it's car after car after car with Humvees and this and that and the other thing, all the machines of war, just rolling by my house. And
that means we are
hundreds
going.
of cars long, and I'm going.
That means we're going. I mean, Dan, are you
I
telling
don't know
me
if
that
they're
you're
firing them or if they're coming. I don't know what they're doing with them. But the point is, Phil's right. It's all about the money. We
Dan,
only do this. We police where our interests, where we have financial interests.
Dan, you actually have some news that I want to ask about now. You said and I'm coming to you next, 816. Dan, you just said that you saw trains after trains of these military equipment. Are these going to the docks or are these going away from the docks?
They go both directions.
Oh, okay.
So
Anyhow, hang with me, Dan. I want to get 816 in, and then we'll continue this. 816, who do I have the honor of speaking with?
Hello, Egberto.
Hey, Dr. Theis, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
All right. Give your input, my friend, now from the political, from your political point of view.
Well, I mean, I was listening with interest to what was being said. I largely agree. I think Dan, who spoke last, made a very good point, and I want to take issue with somebody that said we're the world's policemen for our interests. It's not my interest. It's corporate America's interest.
Amen.
And we're spending a lot of tax money. I think the number's around $4 trillion that we've spent or will have spent on our escapades in Iraq and Afghanistan to support corporate profits and corporate extraction of wealth of third world countries. The other thing I would say is, why was Saddam Hussein such a bad guy? He wasn't a bad guy in 82 when Rumsfeld went over there and made a deal with him to give him aid if he would attack Iran. He wasn't a bad guy in 88 when he was gassing the Kurds. He became a bad guy when he wouldn't play our toady and do exactly what we wanted. And that's what I think we have to realize. Saddam Hussein's power in the Middle East, his ability to invade Kuwait, was in part our creation.
Amen.
Wow.
Continue. I like that direction. Continue.
And if you look at the Middle East, our unwavering support for Israel, no matter what they do, leads to a lot of ill will. Our overthrowing the Shah in 54 or so, leads to a lot of ill will. I mean, most of our problems in that region can be traced directly back to our own actions.
Yeah,
and that's not my saying it. That's the CIA calling all these things blowback.
Israel is our pit bull on a leash that we can call on at any time. We can take them off the leash and we can have them do our policing for us. That's why we do that. They're the only ones willing to play our game and be our little pit bull over there, and that's why we support them. And we always will.
A question.
As long as
there's another reason we support them. It goes back to something I think it was John said about ISIS being an apocalyptic movement. We have our own apocalyptic movements here in the States, and they want Israel as a country because they think that'll bring the second coming of Christ and the end of the world.
Oh, I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. I'm a Christian, but I'm a liberal Christian because I think the fundamentalists are coming out with some crazy stuff. The dominionists want to take over the whole world and make it a Christian world. I think Christianity or spiritualism, religion in itself, needs to be more personal and less and not political at all.
Exactly.
But they have the same end as all political groups. But organized religion has the same end. It's for a very few people to control the wealth of a very large people. They just go about it differently than the way government does. But they have the exact same ends.
I want to bring a few more folks into the conversation, and I'm keeping you guys here. I'm going to 412 and then 620. So 412, who do I have the honor of speaking with? 412, you're on the air.
Hi, Egberto. It's Greg Russack. How are you?
Greg, how you doing, my friend?
Doing real well. Good to
talk to me, sir. Talk to me.
The one comment I would add to the discussion is the language that's being used to describe what it is that we have to do about ISIS, and it is the language of the military-industrial complex. It's meant to keep us afraid. It's meant to keep us afraid. It's meant to make sure that we don't have a lack of perceived enemies. Now, nobody's going to defend ISIS in terms of who they are and what they're doing. That would be ridiculous. But without a targeted enemy to pursue, then we don't have society's backing in this idea that the world is a dangerous place. We need to keep making bigger and bigger investments into our military. That means lots and lots of money for especially the larger contractors. But there also is a trickle-down effect that does occur from there, of course, too, with smaller companies being subcontractors. It's all driven by an economic interest that, we have, for better or for worse, created as one of the fundamental cornerstones of our economy at this point. If we don't start to change the way we perceive the world, and if we don't start to elect people who share in that changed perception and belief, we're simply going to continue to become more and more militarized, as is evidenced by what's happening in places like Ferguson. Those police forces have that military hardware because that's last year's product. They had to get it off the shelf so the Department of Defense could invest in new product. And that's really all I wanted to add.
Greg, yeah, I'm going to let you in right now, but Greg, you hit it on the money, and you hit it so succinctly. Now, let me just tell folks, because whenever we have discussions like this, it seems like we always come out and say, yeah, these are the problems. I mean, I have 10 super intelligent folks on this line right now, but it's a bit more important than that. We know what the problem is, and the question is what all of us, all the folks here that are discussing this stuff actively, what are you going to do within the body politic to get that solved? And I'm glad to see that within our framework here, and learning from each other these things that we're supposed to be doing, that we can then go out there and educate and make sure that people not just talk about it, but actually start doing something about it, both online and in person and offline. Who was it that was trying to get in? Was that Dr. Theis?
Well, no, I have something to say, but somebody else was trying to get in, I think.
Okay, who was that? Let me get that person in first. Okay, go ahead, Phil.
I agree. We do have to have some solutions, and in order to get reasonable solutions, you have to get everybody in our body politic together. But everything is so divided. Every time the president wants to do something, immediately they're on his back.
Phil, I want to stop you before you finish that comment. I want to spot because we are divided by design. That is all by design, and that is what we, everybody of all cultures or whatever, those of us who realize that this division is actually done on purpose, we have to do something about that. Continue, Phil.
That brings me to a point. I've been studying about the John Birch Society and how it's led to the Tea Party. There's a direct line there. I was reading a book by a woman whose parents were founding members, and that's part of their thing is to keep us at constant warfare, keep us constantly in terror, and they have to have demons in order to keep their narrative going. They started jumping on the president before he ever got into the office. Mitch McConnell said, we're going to make him a one-term president, months after he got in. I guess what I would suggest that we do is to get the people who are apathetic, more involved, and more educated. Because, like I said, in order for us to solve some of these major problems, we have to, at least pull together.
Now, you just mentioned one of the most important things, because as Dan would tell you, Dan has a number that he usually uses, Dan Aronson that is, where he shows that the problem with America right now is not about Democrats voting and Republican voting, but it's mostly about those not voting. So when you talk about bringing the apathetic back into circulation, that is exactly right. I want to go back to Dr. Theis because he had something he wanted to say, and then I'm going to bring in 620 to make his point. Go ahead, Dr. Theis.
Well, yeah, I wanted to go back to that comment on the militarized police. I think he was absolutely correct in saying it's last year's models. In many ways, though, the fact that they're last year's models provide an excuse to do something that many governments want to do, which is provide domestic security in a way that allows them to keep control of their population. And we tend to think that our government's not going to do that. But the level of inequality that exists in the United States today, there is not a single country that has ever had the kind of inequality we have today that is either hasn't been dictatorially governed or had massive unrest. Things like Ferguson are simply symptoms of this deeper unhappiness with the way in which the society works for all of us. And it's absolutely essential to arm the police if you're going to keep control of an unhappy population.
Prescient and true. And I've heard that exact sentiment on several of the blogs that I've written over on Ferguson, sir. I've heard that one. Now, 620, is this my friend Jack?
Yeah, it's Jack.
Hey, Jack, come on in.
I want to make a comment on three things.
Yes, sir.
First of all, ISIS exists as a result of the two Pauls, Paul Wolfowitz and Paul Bremer. Now, we didn't
right.
we didn't bring in Paul Bremer and Wolfowitz, we would not have would have left Iraq shortly after Hussein got captured. I think that was in the right time. It's not a bad thing that we did away with Hussein. It's what we listened to the Pauls, and they decided they're going to have Iraq run itself after 2003 or something like that in a year. But the two Pauls, that the big mistake by having Bremer run
the
Iraq
invasion.
Now, okay, now it's all about oil. I listened to Rachel Maddow last night, and this is all a special thing. It was all about oil. We worship the big oil companies and that. And number three, two things I want to mention, and that's a fault of human nature, is fundamentalism and extremism.
Got
They ought
you.
to all be militant moderates. That's what I call myself. And I'm proud. I like Dan Erickson. I trying to catch up with him over the last Mondays, but I keep getting stuff about. The program didn't start yet. It's 11 o'clock at night.
Let me let Jack address that, Jack. I'm going to put your mic on hold a while because Dan Aronson, there were a few people that contacted me that were unable to listen to your wonderful program on Monday night. So I hope that is sort of sorted out.
Well, actually, Monday, I think it was 2 Mondays ago. Last Monday, Tanya Jefferson guest hosted while I was sequestered in company meetings. But yeah, so hopefully we have that sorted out. But I just have to say,
you know what,
Jack,
Dan? Why don't you take
Jack hit
Dan,
the nail on the head with
Dan,
all three of his comments.
Dan, beforehand, I want
Jack.
you to do something. Dan,
yes,
beforehand,
yes, sir.
I'd like you to do something. Please go ahead and tell us about your shows on Mondays, because we want to make sure that all these shows, tell each other about what's going on. So please tell us a little bit about your show on Monday.
So it's Press One for Democracy. We start at 9 p.m. East Coast time. The topic typically happens that day. I typically pick the topic that day because I want it to be as current as possible. And I also don't want to end up repeating shows like, I don't want to repeat a topic. So I can't tell you what the topic's going to be. But given today's political landscape, there's never a shortage of things to talk about. So.
Okay, Dan, you can comment on the stuff now.
I just wanted to say, Jack was absolutely brilliant. He hit the nail on the head with all 3 points. But here's the solution is found in history. It's real simple. If you look at what happened post Cold War, right? So after the wall fell and the Cold War was declared to be over, what did we have? We had the end of Bush 1, then we had Clinton, and we had a decade of prosperity unseen before. Clinton slashed the military budget. He invested in infrastructure. He invested in. He lowered taxes to a point, and we had this boom, this economic boom. It's called peacetime, folks. You want a solution? Vote everybody out that's for war. It's that simple. Because when there's war, right, the only people that make money is the military-industrial complex. If you look back like to World War II, look at all the people that were employed by the war machine, right? Regular people would walk in and they'd get jobs at these factories. Now it's 10 contractors that do 90% of our that make 90% of our stuff, and half of the top 10 contractors, Egberto, not American companies.
That is amazing, isn't it? That is so amazing. But stick with me, Dan. Let me bring in 414. 414. Who do I have the honor of speaking with?
It's Bob from Wisconsin.
Hey, Bob. How you doing?
I'm okay. I don't know if I may have missed it or not, but did anyone talk about the kind of unemployment that we would be faced with and the economic hit our entire economy would take if the military-industrial complex was disbanded?
I want to address that directly to you, my friend. I want to address it directly because that is one of the things that people have talked about a whole lot. And it's a red herring. Let me tell you what I mean by that. It is true that once the submarine shops in Virginia, once the plants in Fort Worth, Texas, once the plants in Long Beach and all these areas that build war are phased out, that there theoretically would be a whole lot of unemployment. But you know what is so interesting? Have you been to Shanghai? Have you been to all these other cities? You know, one is not a war is not production through. I'm gonna have to put you on hold while I respond because of the noise. But production, I guess it wasn't your mic, but production through the rest of the country is in need. We're in need of so much that when the president speaks about infrastructure, it's no little matter. When other politicians speak about infrastructure, it's not little matter. When folks speak about the a failing educational system that really need dollars pumped into it and create a whole lot of more employment, it's not imaginary. There's a lot that we as a society can do if we internalize the spending within the country that based on Economics 101 would be much better than defense spending. Let me give an example. In Iraq, right now, when you go to Iraq, I'm going to have to shut mics down and then I'll turn them on because there's some noise coming from them. But here's the deal, Bob. When you speak about the amount of work that needs to be done internally, roads building, the circulation of the money from building roads, from building bridges, from building airplanes, from building mass transit, from educating kids, getting more teachers into schools, from all these issues. These are monies that are spent directly within the community. These are dollars that are circulated over and over again. When we build weapons of war, it employs a few people that spend their money, but the vast majority of that wealth, as Dan Aronson mentioned before, how many of these parts are brought in from foreign countries? Why? Because if I can build a tank that is 40, 50, 60, 70% foreign parts. But it's American made. It's made here in the United States. But it bring all these parts in. These dollars are not circulated to the masses. The profits from these dollars go to a very, very select few. And then those monies do not end up here in the United States, but they end up offshore, untaxed. So altogether, that mirage about the military-industrial complex somehow destroying that complex of war and killings would somehow destroy jobs is the biggest fallacy, and I'll let you respond right now, Bob. Talk to me, my friend.
It's just something that was crossing my mind. Certainly short term, it's going to cause some pretty serious disruption while all of these skills and resources are redirected for infrastructure or improving our own internal needs. We can't deny, however, that if indeed we said no more war tomorrow, there would be a massive disruption, at least in the short term. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would, but I would never say no more war. I would say exactly what the president says. Anybody tries to get to America, America would take action. But the reality is right now we are oversupplied with military gear. I mean, the type of wars that are being fought, the type of gear that we have, let's look at not F-18. I forgot the new plane that they're building. Somebody else is going to tell me about it yes. I mean, that is a plane. That is a great plane or whatever. I really don't know what it's going to be used for. It's great to have a few prototypes. I don't disagree with that. But the mass building that they want of that, I don't know what they're talking about. Here's the reality, Bob. You and I know that robotics is powerful right now. The reality is airplanes are really reaching their points of non-usefulness where it comes to the actions that we want it to take. The G's that we want to take right now in planes would kill human beings. So that is not really where we're at. As far as you mentioned, an important thing, the disruption that would occur in the short term. In engineering, we have a term called gradients. Bad things happen wherever there are large gradients, and that is exactly what you are speaking about. We don't want large gradients in the scale down. So therefore, what we are saying is not necessarily that we just go cold turkey and kill the industrial complex. We say exactly what I think you would imply, that we do it in a responsible manner to take care of people as this occurs. That's pretty much what I would do. But I want to get to 412, and then I'll come back. 412, you're on the air.
Hey, Berno, it's Greg.
You called back in. Okay, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I fell off. Sorry. I did want to add one comment, though, and maybe this is more a rhetorical question than anything else. Do we really want to live in a society that is so beholden to the instruments of war that it becomes only an economic question? I don't. Great
comment. And the answer is, I can guarantee you for every American citizen or the vast majority of American citizens that it is not the case. The problem is that most Americans do not know that. They don't know that war has been used for an economic boon for some. And that's what it is, Greg. But look, we're at 12 minutes, and I have a whole lot of callers. And you know the theory behind this show is that everybody gets their closing statements, even Dan Aronson, who is telling me, Egberto, you better get busy and put me on. So therefore, I'm going to make the first closing statement, my coffee party brother, Dan Aronson. Come on in.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make a quick comment to our friend who's worried about what happens. Every post-war economy has been a boom. Everyone. We redirect the money, as you said, to infrastructure and to other things that help the regular common guy. There's your Main Street bailout that never happened. There it is, right there. We take that money and we redirect it, and subsidies go for people and not corporations, and that's how we fix this thing.
That is so true. Is that your closing statement, Dan?
That's my closing statement, yes.
Okay, let me go to Phil, and I did it 10 minutes early because I figured folks are going to have a bit more windy statements. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, I totally agree about changing our wartime economy into a peacetime economy. I think that we can do this pretty smoothly. I think a lot of jobs in the war economy and the military-industrial complex could translate to green energy and high-speed rail and stuff like that. that would make us based on peace, not war.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Phil. Let me go to Greg. Give me your closing statement. We still have a good time, but I still want to take them out.
I guess the closing statement that I would make would be to continue to put the effort into being an educated citizen, put the effort into being an informed voter, and on some level, stand your ground. You have to be an individual of principle. Sometimes compromise is not the route to take, and if the individuals of an ideology are so focused on things like war and conquering and subjugation, you shouldn't really. They can't be part of the discussion. They can't be part of the solution unless they're willing to change their beliefs, and that's the part that I think, frankly, liberals and progressives need to be a little bit more confrontational, a little bit more aggressive about. We're too willing, it seems, too often to want to find compromise, and sometimes that's not the answer. I'll be out with that.
And sometimes that is not in the best interest of the country either, right?
Absolutely. That's my point, is that it's not in the best interest of the country today to be trying to find compromise with people like Lindsey Graham, with people like John McCain, with people who would support the idea that it's perfectly reasonable and rational for the police to have armored vehicles in the streets firing tear gas at citizens. How can you possibly defend that as a democratic move? That's not a democracy. That's a tyranny.
Greg, before I go on,
one last thing. I have no interest, common ground, with people who will support that kind of militaristic police force. They are part of the problem, and they need to be called out for it. They need to be pointed out for it, and they need to be shut out of the discussion in terms of what the solutions are. Because there's enough of us, as Dan points out, there's enough of us in this country to make a difference. We just get off our asses and do it.
Greg, you're absolutely right. I notice, I'll talk about the Hillary Clinton on another show because I think that she's barking up that tree that you are speaking about needed to be cut down, but we'll talk about that on another show. Thank you very much for calling in, Greg. Bob from Wisconsin, why don't you give me a closer?
Well, I was just doing a little bit of remembering. George Bernard Shaw, in 1890, wrote something called Major Barbara, which the major function of it, or major focus of that particular piece, and this is before World War I, remember, he was the father, or the major character, was a weapons producer. Andrew Undershaft was the chap's name. In any case, he made a pretty good argument for why he had to maintain armaments, why that was his business, and why it was very profitable and very good for the economy. I do not particularly like it. I mean, Shaw wrote at that time in opposition to the idea of an armaments industry. I am concerned that, indeed, the issue of militarization of our local police forces, in order to continue supporting our arms industry, is something that concerns me. I do not like that idea. I think it's a wrong idea. I think it's, as was said, an undemocratic idea. It is not. They are to protect and serve, not to oppress, not to control and oppress. That's the idea of police. I'm curious, briefly, if you'd tell me what you think the short-term turnaround of switching swords to plowshares. I mean, how long is that going to take, would you imagine?
I have no idea, but I think America is it's above my pay grade to answer that accurately, but America is a great country. Really, it really, really is. And I think Americans have great workers, and I think we could create structures, governmental structures, that actually, if necessary, print money to mitigate whatever would occur in that short term. So I mean, it's our economy is a stopping point. I think as such we can make arrangements. But I got to run now to Jack. So thank you very much for calling in, Bob. It was a pleasure having you.
Hey.
Jack, you're up, Jack.
Yeah,
give me a quick closer.
Okay. The thing is. All right, it's depressing what they do with the cops. like Ferguson, you got a reactionary chief of police in Ferguson, and I did work on back in St. Louis. I did work on in St. Louis Metropolitan Youth Commission of St. Louis and St. Louis County, where they did a study on Ferguson fluorescent, and they had the delinquency problem back then, and the delinquency was mainly more white. But I'm going to harp on this fundamentalism and extremism being the cause of much of human misery.
Jack,
think about that.
You're so right, and I'm glad you made an important statement there about the how even back in the Ye day there was an interesting problem there. But I got to run to Dr. Theis now. But again, Jack, keep calling. Thank you for having you on the show again. Now, Dr. Theis, your closing statement. Oh, my bad. Dr. Theis, okay, now you're on.
Yeah, I'm here. So, okay, our empire is dying. Ordinary Americans understand that. Our leaders and our elites haven't quite come to that conclusion. There's tremendous arrogance governing our country and governing the world when our leaders think they can go over to any part of the world and bomb with impunity. I don't think that makes them any better than the people that drop bombs that send terrorists over to kill our people. Quickly answer Bob's question about how long it would take. It would take a lot less time and a lot less money than it has taken to turn the Mideast into the democracy that we thought we'd turn it into.
Amazing. Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Dr. Theis. Is that it?
That's it.
Thank you very much, sir, and thank you for calling. John from San Antonio.
Yeah, I think the two things that are going to happen right away is we're going to be left with this choice of are we going to bomb Syria? And I agree with Obama, and actually I agree with a lot of your statement that you made earlier. I don't think we should be bombing in Syria. But I just wanted to give you the other perspective from the different military leaders. I'm not saying I necessarily agreed with them. I'm just wanted to say this is what they think, and this is how they perceive it. And also the American public in the polling also agrees, even Democrats, 56% of Democrats think that we should strike ISIL in Syria, and 79% of Republicans. So, we've overstated the terrorist threat since 9/11, and now we have a force that is actually taking over, parts of Iraq and, a good portion of Syria. And so, it's kind of hard to know exactly what to do, but one thing I think will be a determining factor is, are they going to actually have attacks here in America? And, I mean, you think about bin Laden, if he would have never attacked America, he would definitely probably be alive today. If he put his strategy on, let's take over wherever, let's take over the Saudi Arabia, or let's take over where he was in Somalia, there would be a very different situation, or, the tribal areas of Pakistan, than if he decided to do 9/11 and then
Gotta go, John.
he was okay. So that's going to be a major factor. If they decide to bomb, Americans are going to want war. If they decide not to attack, there's going to be less call for that.
Excellent. Well, folks, once again, thank you very much for a wonderful show. I have some of the best callers, I think, on radio, bar none, because you guys are some informed people. I'm going to say one thing, however, I think being informed is not enough. You have to be, and I think all of us here, and I know many here are already activists, but we must be activists because we are the ones who are going to actually change this country, not anybody else. We are going to be the ones having to do it ourselves. Please remember, Coffee Party has currently 3 shows, and soon to be 5 shows, I expect. But right now on Mondays at 10 p.m. Eastern, we have Press 1 for Democracy with Dan Aronson, that voice that you heard earlier on describing his show. On Thursdays, we have at 3 p.m. Eastern, Lunch with Loudon. That's a wonderful show with Janine Loudon. And on Saturdays, you're here with yours truly, Politics Done Right with Egberto Willies. Thank you again for giving me a great show, giving America a great show that they'll be able to listen to, if not live, on podcast going forward. This has been a great show. Guys, have a wonderful Saturday and see you next week. Arrivederci. Bye-bye.